you confused about which instructional design model is the best for you or your project? Well, here on Vanessa Anchored, we're going to start a series that walks us through some of the most common instructional design models. And of course, we couldn't start without starting with our girl Addie. So keep watching if you want to walk through the Addie process. I'm Vanessa, and here on this channel, I help aspiring instructional designers and e-learning developers get off of the sidelines and get into the L&D game. And like I mentioned earlier, what we're talking about today is the Addie model. So our girl has been around the block once or twice, and you cannot get very far in this industry without knowing who Addie is. So let's get started. So Addie stands for Analysis, Design, Development, Implementation, and Evaluation. It was started back at Florida State University. Hey, Florida. They were working on a project with the US Army. And now that I think about it, and like as I was researching it and seeing how the Addie model actually plays out, it makes perfect sense. Like I could totally see the Army wanting to dot all their I's, cross all their T's before they move on to the next phase of the project or the next phase of the process. So the Addie model probably worked out pretty perfect for them in the very beginning. So I would say it is a very easy model to understand. It's not complicated. It is just what it is. And I actually think that a lot of instructional design models today really do derive from this process in some sort of way, shape, or form. And even if you look at Anchored Training's methodology, where it's you dream it, we build it, it kind of takes some of those same principles where we'll take a lot of your requirements and we'll sit down and look at your learners, the problem that you're trying to solve, all of those things, and your wish list, and then we'll work together to identify what works and what might not work, what's within budget, what's not within budget, and then we'll design and develop your dream product. So a lot of methodologies that you hear people take on in their personal philosophy and instructional design and other instructional design models, they all derive from Addie. So like I mentioned, Addie's biggest pro is that it's very clear and easy to understand. So let's just get right down to it. First, you're going to start in the analysis phase. And so this is where you're going to have your project kickoff. You're going to learn more about the learners. You're going to learn more about the organization or your clients in general. You're going to try to understand what the problem is that they're trying to solve, and then try to figure out if training is even a true need for this problem, or if there may be something else that's an issue. Then you're going to move on to the design phase, and some people confuse this with graphic design and visual design, and that's not here. This is the instructional design process. So this is where you're developing your outlines and you're really looking at, what does this whole curriculum or what type of training or learning assets does this process or this problem need? That's part of that design phase. And then the development phase, well, that's pretty easy. That's where you're actually developing the materials, be it facilitator guides or e-learning modules or job aids, whatever may help and be the best suited for the learning. Finally, it's implementation. So where are you launching this module? Where are you, releasing these job aids? How are they getting into the hands of your learners? That's all part of the implementation plan. And then finally, evaluation. Evaluation is kind of like a dream for every freelancer because you don't really get too far into evaluation. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with Kirkpatrick's 4 levels of evaluation. I actually think that the book is, yep, there it is. The book is sitting up there on my desk behind me. So this is the 4 different levels of evaluation, starting from the very basic learner reaction all the way up to, the return on investment for the organization. And I can say that most organizations and projects, they do level 1. They do sort of level 2, very basic, just a matter of knowledge checks and assessments with the learning, and then 3 and 4 basically go out the window. Very rarely are we seeing a lot of organizations truly take on the E in the Addie process. So really, Addie should just sometimes stop at I with a lot of organizations, but that's besides the point. So Addie is a waterfall method where basically you don't start the next phase until you've completed the phase before it, and whatever you learn in that phase before directly impacts the design and the development and the next phase and so on and so forth. And that's all really great, but that's just not really the way that the world works today, or jobs work today, or projects run today. And I don't know if it's always in the best interest of the learner. I mean, there are a lot of times that you think that you build something that's amazing, that is truly in the best interest of the learner, and when you actually implement it and you have learners taking it, they're not using things in the right way. They don't really understand how a certain part of the process works, and that's because you're not involving your users, and you're not actually bringing that evaluation piece a little bit earlier in the process. So think about it. Let's say your learner is not part of that analysis phase, and you're just getting analysis from their manager, and they think that they know what the problem is. Well, when you actually talk to a learner, that's not even the problem, what their manager is saying. So for example, last week I was on a lot of needs analysis and fact-finding phone calls for clients. And this client, it was all upper management, field managers, all of those types of people. No actual users of the system that we were evaluating refresher training for. And all of their managers were saying, this is the type of training that we need, and this is why that they don't use the system, or why they're frustrated with the system. And then our instructional designer met with the end user and the actual person using this tool, and they said, the reason that we don't use XYZ system is because it's antiquated and it doesn't have, what we need, and we're not given enough information. We've seen other builds of the system, and other builds in the past have actually given us useful information. None of those things were said by any of the managers. So you can see there's this really huge disconnect. So if you're following the Addie model, right, and you're not bringing in, let's say, a key part of your process, your learner, to evaluate your product or evaluate your outline, part of your design phase, well, you're really gonna, when you actually get to the end and you're evaluating your end product and you're evaluating your learning, it's gonna fail. It's not gonna solve the problem that you were set out to achieve. And part of that problem is also not bringing in the learner in the analysis phase. But like I said, that evaluation phase, it really actually needs to go through the entire process. So I actually saw a really cool infographic, and if I find it, I'll insert it. And what it was instead of Addie sitting so linearly where you don't evaluate until the end, the E actually sat in the middle, and then the ADDI sat around it. And I thought that was a really interesting way of showing the model that you don't see too often, or you don't hear about too often, because that evaluation piece, the piece that is the most elusive of all the pieces, that's one of the most important, and you should be evaluating at each phase and each stage. But the way people interpret it today, it's not always done in that way. So I think that there's definitely room for some improvements on Addie, and there are different methodologies or models now that fit the bill for certain projects. But I wouldn't say that Addie is a bad one to know, and part of the reason for that is that 99.9999999% of job descriptions are going to ask you to be familiar with the Addie process. And I totally understand that it may sound antiquated, and as long as you're familiar with adult learning principles and other instructional design models and methodologies, that you can still achieve the same task or the same outcome. It's just really good to know the Addie process, really understand how it works, and be able to take something that you've worked on and go back to what is it, how did you apply each stage of the Addie model to that project or to that process, because that may be a question, that likely will be a question, especially from new recruiters that don't know anything about instructional design, and this is one of their scanner questions to or not scanner, what's the gate questions, right? Gatekeeping questions, whether or not they're going to keep you in the process or out of the process. And if you start talking about a different methodology that you use that you find that is a better model to use, they're probably just going to scan you out because they're, you know, part of the job description is if you know Addie, and if you use Addie, and in their mind, you're supposed to know, you know, and at that organization, you use Addie. So I definitely recommend knowing it and having an example where you've used Addie as part of a project, or how you will use, or you have used Addie, or how you can use Addie as part of a project. So what are some deliverables that you might see as part of the Addie process? Well, in your analysis phase, it could be a training needs analysis and a report stating this is the, you know, the problem that we're trying to solve. This is the information I got from our learners and from our other subject matter experts that we were working with, and their feedback and their idea of the process or the problem, and their information about it. And here is our recommendations of how we move forward now, you know, how we move forward. And then that's when you can move into that design phase, right? And so in that design phase, you're really working with your subject matter experts to learn more and really get that knowledge transfer and start putting that instructional design hat on. And that's when you're going to do things like outline, you know, start developing a training or a learning plan, right? So put together a roadmap and identify, okay, we're going to start off with some email, drip-fed emails that are, you know, revving up and getting them ready to launch the next training project or the next training initiative at your organization, and why it's important. And, you know, they may be resistant to the change, but this is why the change is good and how it's going to help them in their job. So that's part of that that learning plan. And then the next thing that we'll outline is, okay, we're going to do a virtual, well, we're in a COVID world, so we're going to do a virtual training, and these are the topics that we're going to hit in the virtual training. And once they leave there, these are some of the how-to videos that we're going to provide them so that they can have some additional reinforcement on what we trained them on in the actual virtual training or concepts that we're going to reinforce. So this is the outline. And storyboarding sometimes is part of that process and sometimes it's not. Kind of depends on who you talk to. If they consider storyboarding as part of that part of the process, I always find that as like a gray area in the middle of design and development. But then you move into that development phase, and this is just those execution of those materials, right? So it's creating your job aids, and it's designing your e-learning modules, you know, creating your facilitator guide, and all of those pieces of that puzzle. Once you get to implementation, some key deliverables you might have are loading the videos to your company intranet, or doing a train the trainer, or actually training the end users, you know, whatever is part of your plan, your learning plan. And then finally you have your evaluation. So like I said, if you're just going to hang out in levels 1 and 2, that's probably a training survey and a knowledge check or assessment. However, it could go beyond, and you could start looking at behavior change, and then eventually ROI if you build out that time and have those measurable objectives that you set out to achieve since, you know, from the beginning, from your analysis phase, and you identified what those were. The behavior change, that level 3, that's always, I think, a really good one to achieve and strive towards, and one that I think that most organizations could do if they actually set out from the beginning and developing their learning plan. They could actually achieve if they put more thought and emphasis on actually getting to that 3rd level of evaluation. So like I said, typically you're going to hang out in levels 1 and 2 in most projects, most organizations, but if you could, you know, strive towards level 3, I think that is something that would be a really great way to ensure that you're integrating learning and you're making learning part of the culture at that organization and not just something that they have to do as part of their job. So what instructional design model do you want to know more about? Leave a comment down below with that instructional design model so we can add that to our list in our series. Well, friends, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in our next video. Bye!